Marion Close Conoley, and welcome to No Barriers. Today I'm joined by a panel of professors from Cal State Long Beach. Let me introduce them to you. First, Professor Susan Gomez Zwiep. Welcome.
Thank you.
Second, Professor Lisa Marin-Hansen.
Hi, thank you.
So happy to have you. And finally, Professor Kelly Young.
Thank you.
And all of these professors are from our College of Natural Sciences and Mathematics. And our topic today is one that's personally very important to me because I'm so interested in finding new ways or enhancing ways to ensure our students' success. And these three professors, plus others in the university, and I have had several conversations about a perspective, a teaching technique, or it's a way to look at student learning called growth mindset. So I wanted to explore that with the three of you today. So would you just give me some of your thoughts about when you define growth mindset for your own use as a professor? How do you define that growth mindset?
I'll start.
Thank you, Lisa.
Sure. Thinking about growth mindset from a professor's perspective, I think there are a couple of different ways to consider it. One is our own ideas and beliefs that we have about our students. So what is it that we see our students being able to do? And I think it used to be a case that some people thought students were in a particular type of box or bell curve, perhaps, and we're challenging some of those ideas when we think about growth mindset and expecting everyone to be able to grow and that everyone has the potential truly to grow. Mm-hmm. And then another aspect has to do with our students and their own beliefs of themselves, as well as how they work with each other, their peers, and understanding that if you come in and you think you're not good at math, that doesn't have to be the case. You can actually grow in your abilities to perform and to be able to do well. Mm-hmm. And that's based upon a lot of research that I know my colleagues will be referring to.
Mm-hmm. So you're really talking about growth mindset as part of the professor's worldview, as well as the student's understanding of self. Very interesting. Mm-hmm. Kelly?
Well, I was just going to add to that because that's definitely how I see it, but adding to this idea that effort can facilitate learning and that learning is hard, and what we're teaching in our classrooms and earning a college degree, there are many challenges and many obstacles, and you can't overcome those obstacles without some effort. So I think adding to that, just this idea that hard work can facilitate that deep learning.
Mm-hmm. And do you suppose that when students experience something hard or something that doesn't come easily, they get discouraged and give up? Is that an experience that you've had?
Yes, that can. It happens to all of us, right? Yeah. We hit something and it's a challenge, and we really have a few choices. We can continue on and persist, even though it is a challenge, or we can stop. And I think that there are many things that we can do in the classroom as professors to facilitate the trying and persisting, or actually inhibit it. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an important element, that it's part of it is understanding as a student, or all of us learning things, that things are hard, so try harder, put more time in it. But also on the professor side, that there's things we can do to make that more likely. There's supports we can handle for the student that would make that effort more likely. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Susan, were you going to add something?
I think the only thing else that I would add is a lot of times people talk about growth mindset like it's an event, when I think both of my colleagues' comments really speak to the fact that it's a multifaceted phenomena. Part of it comes from what the student enters the classroom with, but part of it is influenced by the environment. So my ability to operate within more of a growth mindset actually could change from course to course. But it's also about our ability to think about our own thinking, this ability to say, where are my strengths and where are my weaknesses, and how do I use them to persist through a problem, and how do I use that understanding to know when to seek other help, and what kind of help do I seek, and how do I navigate that space, instead of shutting down and feeling like I don't have the ability to continue.
So I don't know if this fits in the same category that we have talked about metacognition, thinking about thinking, and when we can figure out how we're thinking and try to make alterations on that, the suggestion I'm getting is that can lead to changes in behavior, or at least changes in motivation or courage to try. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think that's very important. Well, we've all used the word growth a lot. So, and the opposite of that in this context is fixed. So when you think about the fixed mindset, I'm wondering how you see it in the classroom, how you define it, and how it relates to the overall concept of growth mindset.
I think, Lisa, you said it when you said, I'm not good at math. You know, a student comes in, I'm not good at math, or I'm not a standardized test taker. I'm really bad at essays. And just sort of defining yourself as that, that is a fixed, it's one aspect of a fixed mindset, that this defines me and therefore that's the end. Yeah. And it is really a limiting mindset in that sense.
So it really does, the student, him or herself, could put themselves into a box and say, I'm good at this, but I'm not good at this. And so that's a little tricky, because that's a pretty common, I hear that a lot from students. You know, I'm a literature person, I'm not a science person. And in fact, I think it permeates a lot of our culture. People talk about that all the time. And it surprised me how, well, I won't get in. I was going to say how easily people say I'm not a math person, but hardly anybody says I'm not a reading person. So there's something about that we've done in our culture that has made it okay not to be a math person, but I do digress, so sorry about that. So the fixed mindset is a bit imprisoning in a sense. Would you add anything else, Lisa or Susan?
Go ahead.
Well, so my background in education actually started as a middle school teacher in an area of Los Angeles that I think has all of the attributes that you would think of when you think about a poor urban neighborhood. And it was really interesting to see students, middle school students, who came into the classroom with a fixed mindset almost imposed on them by 8th grade for various reasons, many of which had nothing to do with the actual students' abilities. They were assigned a limitation, and the coursework, the opportunities in some way were shaped around that sort of limiting expectation. And so I think we have to also consider in all of the subtle ways that we convey the limitations on their abilities, from assumptions we make about who they are and why they're making choices and what's happening in their lives, and even the acknowledgement that some of our students have experiences that are very different than ours, so they interpret the world differently than we do. So I know I have my spaces where I'm a fixed mindset person, and I'm, and I think it's important to realize that within those spaces, there's anxiety. There's like physical responses about moving in those spaces. But sometimes we impose that on students. I think, Kelly, you talked about inhibiting a growth mindset.
So that makes it more complex, isn't it? It's not as if people are born with it, but there are many environmental influences that can promote it in self, and very importantly in others, and especially in teachers and other people around, but especially teachers I'm thinking about, and professors, where the professor or teacher could either become complicit in a sense, yeah, you are, yeah, you can't do that, or lower their expectations. Yeah, kind of dangerous. I was thinking in my own background as a psychologist, all the times we spent testing children, and how there's certainly a frame around which we thought that would be useful, but I can see now, looking back, that could be another influence that could say to the parents, the teacher, the student, the students themselves, I'm really not smart enough for that. Yeah, so it's interesting. Other thoughts about fixed mindset?
I'll just add to what you just mentioned, because Susan and I were just talking about this recently. which is there's been some work recently done to translate some more of Binet's intelligence test.
The famous one, yeah.
Yes, and not the test itself, but his research using the intelligence test ideas. And in the United States, we often have this idea that intelligence itself is fixed. And if you have an IQ that's measured in 6th grade, that somehow this is going to show who you are or what you're able to do. And in this work, we were able to find some French colleagues who translated this work that he did from French into English, and it was amazing because he actually gathered empirical evidence working with kids to change their IQ over time. And that was really astounding to be able to read about these things that he was doing with these kids to really have them think differently and perform differently. So often we think IQ is a fixed thing.
Yeah. So it's interesting that part of the work, the malleability of intelligence or of the brain, as we know now from neuroscience, that wasn't translated. It was more this more simplistic notion of here's your badge, here's your 150, here's your 160, here's your 140, and you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, interesting. So all of you are scientists, educators, scientists. How did you get into, you've mentioned an earlier experience as a middle school teacher, but how did you move from your passion for science into this metacognitive world of growth mindset? What attracted you to that?
Well, for me, it was just having a passion for learning. I mean, I think that's why we're all here, right? We loved a subject so much that we wanted to continue on, study it, and actually remain in school for our whole lives, right? Which is what we're doing. Right?
Okay, now we've been outed on that.
That's it. But having this passion for learning and learning new things, I realized that when I created a positive classroom environment where it was okay to try, and maybe it didn't work the first time, but let's keep going. And I supported students when they maybe didn't do as well as they could have. I found that learning was deeper, that students actually did better, and they commented back to me, hey, I really enjoyed this class. I felt like I learned so much. And or maybe it's one of the first classes where I felt that, and it's because you showed that you really cared.
And were you doing that before you knew the phrase growth mindset? Yeah, okay. So you were living it in a sense. You were a teaching approach in search of a concept, huh?
Absolutely.
An explanatory concept, yeah.
Because
wonderful.
it worked.
It worked.
It worked.
How about Lisa?
And that's wonderful direct experience too. That's really incredible. I think for me, it happened before I had a chance to get that direct experience. So as a science educator, and I started as an elementary teacher and later a middle school teacher like Susan, we took coursework in education and educational psychology. I remember one of my professors sharing with us a study that was done with kids looking at children who were tracked into different levels of instruction, and how oftentimes, like you've both talked about, our expectations for children will manifest and come true because of often what we think children or college students are able to do. So the study that I learned about was about the bloomers. And there were groups of kids, and one teacher was to teach the lower level kids. But she told them, lied to them, and said, you have all been identified as bloomers. We have information that shows us that this year is the year that you are really going to make progress and you are going to grow. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. And I remember as a young education student thinking, this is amazing, that translating that, having that expectation, telling the kids that we have these expectations really created a difference. And so I've kept that with me throughout my life as I've been a teacher and now a professor. And I think expectations and providing access, providing opportunities is really a huge part of growth mindset, even though they didn't call it that in the day.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that proved at least one part of that Insight class was useful.
Right?
Yeah. I know that's sometimes challenged. Yeah.
And I'll just say I'm a really interesting blend of the two of you, because I actually was on a path to be a scientist. It was my gap year, so I had graduated with a degree in integrated biology and was my gap year waiting to go to graduate school. And my aunt said, "Why don't you sub? You're sitting around the house. Go be useful to society." So I did, and having a science degree, they said, "Hey, we're going to put you in a permanent placement." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, I just signed up to sub." But they did, and I got a 7th and 8th grade science classroom. I had no educational training whatsoever. I just had my love of science. And in those early years of trying to figure it out, well, I was just beginning the education components of it. In a professional development training, we were talking about what do you do in the classroom, and I got some really useful advice. They said there's in any teaching situation, there's stuff that is not ideal, but you can't control most of it. You can't control what happens to your kids before they get there. You can't control the background knowledge of your students. There's so much that you can't control, but when they're there with you, you can control what happens in that room. And so that really set me on a path of figuring out, how do I tinker with what I'm doing and check to see how the students are responding and revising so that what I had control over was continuing to be effective.
I think that's a really profound insight, because teachers feel tremendous responsibility, and it can be overwhelming because we are, even here at the university, we have students who are hungry,
Yes.
who are housing insecure, who are coming from home lives or other relationships that certainly are distracting at best from their success as students. And there's only so much we can do. We can make attempts, but I love the idea of being responsible for what you can be responsible for and not giving that up along with the rest, which I have sometimes unfortunately seen. And that would add to that, I think, related to the low expectations. Well, for children like that, what could you expect? Kids who come from families like that, what could you expect? And those are actual quotes, from my past in terms of dealing, in education.
And the flip of it is true. It's that we owe them a really engaging 90 minutes, or in the case of this morning, 2 hours and 45 minutes of instruction.
But who was counting? Yeah.
Right. My students work because it's week 14. But we really owe them that class time that is really targeted to who they are and where they are and what they need, so that their understanding of whatever it is we're tasked with teaching really comes to fruition in that time frame.
This puts a lot of responsibility on you as professors. Not everyone wants to take that. Lots of professors want to say, "You weren't ready for me." I threw it out there, but they didn't get it. What makes you guys different? Smile.
I know.
I mean, maybe I'm being too harsh, but
I will say, in some ways, I do think that that's why we have conversations across a program, across from K-12 to the university, to make sure that when they do get that seat time, they're ready. So it is more than just the individual instructor's responsibility. But I will say for myself, I just find it more engaging. I find it a better use of my time. I'm not comfortable with not providing the most efficient instruction that I can for my students, because the alternative is depressing. I can't wear that badge.
What does it look like in your classroom? Can you give some specifics about what does growth mindset versus fixed mindset look like in your assignments, the way you talk to your students, the way you react to students? And I think we'll spend some time on that, so just we can come back to it after the break. But I'm sure people who are listening are wondering, would I recognize it if I saw it? Or yeah, do you have some ideas that you could pull up?
So I can provide a couple of quick examples. One is being able to allow for revision of student work, which I know is incredibly difficult with large classes. So that's something that we think about in terms of the context and how we're teaching. But by allowing revision to occur, helps us to realize, or helps our students also to realize, that there is a chance that, oh my goodness, I really didn't understand this piece earlier. I can do better on this. That's an expectation and something that they're able to do, and something that we are all striving for, would be one example, I guess.
Yeah, it does add to the workload, but it's very real life, isn't it? How many times have all of us revised an article, revised a speech, tried to revise a life, whatever we have, yeah.
Well, and just to add on to that, I think that there's also this idea of going slow to go fast. Whatever investment you give initially into the feedback and the revision usually pays off down the road. So you're usually spending less time later in the semester trying to correct what has been kind of solidified, rather than taking that time at the beginning to allow that revision and that metacognition to take place, so that kids take it onto their own, and it's not always on yours.
Right.
So that's interesting. Go slow to go fast. I'll remember that.
Well, and something you remarked, we had conversations earlier before we met here, but something Susan was sharing was the importance of that feedback for students, that it be very specific, to help to guide them in being able to make that change. But one of the things I really liked about how you were talking about a particular class and the flow of instruction and how much time a teacher or professor spends giving feedback is, you're kind of like, you said, basically we pick our battles. Like, where do you want to spend the most time? We can't do it in everything, but where might it be the most meaningful? And like you're saying, where do you see that payoff then later? I thought that was cool, because you're not going to give feedback on every single piece of minutia.
And something a student told me not too long ago is that she really appreciated the feedback that was positive. And that's not just to say, oh, good job, but to say, this right here, this is where you met the expectation for blank, 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 blank. So that we're not just telling them in terms of the revision what needs to be altered, but we're also telling them where did you actually get it, and
this is what hitting the mark looks like.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really identify. I think that's really important.
Do you all start your classes with any intro that kind of gets them ready to know things are going to be a little different in this class because of growth mindset, or does it just flow through everything you do?
I think it has to flow through what you do, because like we've been talking about, it has to come from you. You know, you have to embody this idea. This is how you're going to approach your students. And it can be from a very low level. One thing that I do, and this you can kind of start the class this way, and you have to do this on day one, is start with some low level questions, getting them involved. What are the 3 things we just covered? Let's list them. They should know that. This is not a challenging question. Get them to respond. Get them to see that if they say something and they mess up, they get 2 of them, but not all 3. You go, okay, let's all get number 3. Okay, we can do this, and keep doing it. And it's continuous. So even if you're lecturing, every few minutes, you're in, or 30 seconds or so, you're interacting with them. So then you can ask those more challenging. Okay, so now let's put this together. Let's synthesize. Let's do something at a really high level. And they have the courage, I think, to be able to do that and address that, because they know they're in a space where if they bomb it, you go, well, okay, I like that part of the answer, but let's work on the other part and get the whole class involved. And so I think this doesn't have to be this entire change. I'm going to change my class to be in a growth mindset class. It can just be thinking about how can I encourage this trying and persistence in my students, and that's a simple thing to do.
So that's very interesting. So specifically, well, 2 things occurred to me. One, by what you've all said, you all must know you have to know your subject matter so intimately, because you have to know what the key area is, for example, that deserves the extra time. You have to know, in your most recent example, about I'm building up to something that's more complex, and these are the pieces that will make it happen. So this is not, growth mindset isn't some technique to slap on to a kind of novice person and think, gee, this is going to work easily, I'm just going to be positive to students. A positive is good, but what I'm hearing from you is really a high level of certainly mastery of your own areas, and then understanding the all the interrelationships that really move students forward. So, hey, way to go. Yeah, you guys are great. So how do the students react to these activities, the revisions, the let's all answer together kind of thing? Do you have some student reactions you could share? Because some of them would be surprised at this, right?
Yeah. I think that the students we get have a track record of being successful in school. They wouldn't be here if they didn't. So sort of breaking apart what successful means is a bit of a bump for them. And so I think Kelly's comments about it, this idea needs to be thread through a course. It needs to be an environment in the classroom where incomplete understanding has a space and a value. So part of it is the environment where you are asking different levels of questions and different ways of students engaging in exploring those. But I've had several students that are frustrated with the lack of a gold star, for lack of a better word.
Because, as you said, that's what they came. They think that's what got them here. And
so part of the reaction initially is that sort of kickback, but eventually I think they start to appreciate how they're able to monitor and control some of their learning. So that shift from I'm the one that's determining their understanding to them being able to describe its strengths and weaknesses is important. But so like Lisa said, I think there's not a lot of feedback. There's 2 assignments where I'm really specific in feedback, in one course in particular that I can think of, because those are sort of the driving deeper understanding assignments, and they repeat. So feedback is really important when it repeats, right? When you get to do something with that feedback. But there's also student-to-student feedback, because in large lecture halls, I can't always have a one-on-one. Not that I ever teach them, but if I were, you can't have a one-on-one with 70 people. But there's other people in the room, people that are probably closer to the student's own experiences. So having conversations with each other in the class not only gives me space to feel more comfortable in my response, but it gives me another layer of feedback and discussion that I think is important. So there's those 2 things. In the class, it looks like a lot of collaboration that I then monitor. And one-on-one, it looks like certain spaces where I'm giving some really specific feedback in places where I have picked my battle.
Right.
So there's a lot of planning about who's talking with whom, the size of the grouping, and the specific outcomes that you're looking for.
And a lot of planning, but as you do it more and more, it starts to become more automatized for you. You feel it. You're not thinking about it as much as sort of capturing cues.
Well, I was going to comment on that too, that sometimes you're in something that you've planned and you realize, this isn't going quite the way that I thought it would. And so when you're used to shifting gears and saying, okay, it looks like we're really struggling with this. Let's talk, and I need you to draw a diagram of what your thinking is. Or you find a way to change it up, because those things happen, and you do need to respond. Because even though you do plan it well and carefully, it's not always going to be exactly the way you think it's going to go.
I was never trained as a teacher per se, but I did notice when I was the Dean of Education, the best sign of growth in our student teachers was when they stopped just looking for what the students, they stopped thinking about themselves and how they were doing and how they came across, and had they gotten the right board and and when they started talking about how the students reacted to their teaching, and I just saw that in their experience, and that gave me a lot of hope that they were going to be terrific teachers on this. So we've covered a couple of things. We've covered kind of definitions of growth mindset and fixed mindset. Kind of gotten a little bit of personal history of how you all became believers and implementers of it. A little bit more about how it looks in your classroom. So in that kind of introduction, do you want to add anything else before we move on a little bit more in the second half of our show?
Well, one thing I want to add, because you had talked about large versus small classrooms, is that this is something, because it is really coming from the professor's perspective to help engage the students in this kind of mindset. It can be done at any classroom size and at any level. I think that's very important, because sometimes we hear, oh, well, that's a technique, that would be something that you would do only for upper division or only for lower division or only for this discipline, but not my discipline, or, And so I think it's very important to understand that this can be applied across the board.
I bet you would find a lot of people who imagine this to be only with their seniors or their graduate students, because they can't envision how to do it in a large class. Really speaks to something I hope that we'll have a chance to talk about when we come back, about how we might spread this across the rest of the campus. So you're with me, Jane Close Conoley, President at Cal State Long Beach, and three of our professors, all from the College of Natural Sciences and Mathematics. We'll take a short break now and be back to talk more about growth mindset.
California State University Long Beach is a diverse, student-centered, globally engaged public university. Approximately 3,000 international students from over 100 countries attend Cal State Long Beach while pursuing graduate and undergraduate degrees, language programs, and exchange studies. As one of the most diverse campuses in the United States, Cal State Long Beach students represent a balanced mixture of various and numerous ethnic groups. With sunny weather almost all year, Long Beach is an ideal place to live and learn, and was voted as one of America's top 10 most walkable cities. Life is good at California State University Long Beach, a campus rich in diversity, invigorated by cutting-edge quality academic programs, enhanced by location and geography, and imbued with a dynamic and powerful local history.
Welcome back to Growth Mindset. I'm Jane Close Conoley, President at Cal State Long Beach. I'm here with Professor Susan Gomez Zwiep, Professor Lisa Marin-Hansen, and Professor Kelly Young, all from our College of Natural Sciences and Mathematics. And we've been talking about growth mindset, and I've been learning a lot, and I hope our listeners have been learning a lot as well. So, of course, all of this, we started out with really practical applications and how it looks in your classroom, and we can certainly share more of that. But this really comes from quite a body of research. So I'm wondering how confident you are in the research, and of course research keeps going. It's not like there's ever a stop to it, but how are you feeling about the state of the research and growth mindset?
Well, one of the things I think is important to realize is that the growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, it's actually a phenomena that was observed first and understood later. So in other words, we didn't create it out of some need for research. There really was an identifiable distinction between some individuals in terms of persistence and reaction to failure that wasn't limited to any particular previous experience or background. So in her attempt to kind of understand these identified distinctions, I think Dweck did some really interesting investigations about what do these look like, and how do these attempts these mindsets actually interact in the world. So I think that's the first thing I would say is we didn't make it up. They existed, and then
We didn't go
tried
looking for it.
Right.
We saw something happening and had to step back and try to. And this is, you're referring to Carol Dweck.
Carol Dweck, yeah.
Professor at Stanford,
Yeah.
and author of many research articles and a number of books, both for professional and a little bit more popular audiences.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was familiar with her work when it was just research, and then people were talking about this from like the popular book end of things, and I was like, wait, what? Like,
What? Yeah.
I'm not used to being able to talk to people about the research I read. This is exciting.
Yeah, well, and good for her, by the way, because that takes a lot of courage, I think, for a researcher to try to translate what they have been finding in controlled experimental conditions to a larger audience, because then you're always going to attract people who would be not excited about social science research or educational research. Yeah, for sure. So you're feeling pretty good. I'm hearing, Susan, because it's a phenomenon that was observed and then research that built around it. And I bet everybody who's listening to us can relate to that, because as parents or as brothers, sisters, or just friends, we probably all have had the experience of knowing people who, when they're confronted with a difficulty, okay, I'm going to try harder. And I actually met one of our distinguished alums recently in New York City who was told, unfortunately, at this university in the College of Science, you'll never be a doctor. And it made her so mad. She's now a board-certified anesthesiologist in New York, and is, so for her that worked. But for many, and probably many more, being discouraged from proceeding, even in something you're really passionate about, might really send them off. Does that make sense?
Lisa, if we have a brief moment for a personal story, Lisa's heard this story. I went to a large public university in California, which you can look it up. I love my alma mater, but I was in it was the general bio class that all bio majors took. I think there were a lot of people in that class, and I failed. I didn't fail. I got a D on the first midterm. Now, I knew I always got a D on the first midterm because I really had struggled trying to anticipate what they were going to ask me and what it was going to look like and what my questions were supposed to be. So I always did bad on the first one. But my TA called me in. Now, mind you, there were not a lot of people that looked like me in our 900 people course. And then I get called in individually by a TA who suggests that I drop the class. I'm like, why would I drop the class? And he's like, well, you got a D on the first midterm. I'm like, yeah, but there's 3 of them in a final. Like, I got a whole bunch of data points in the future that are not yet determined. I'll be just fine. And he literally was like, are you sure? Like, then questioned me, like, are you sure? And I was like, no, I'm good. And I actually did. I did just fine in that course. But I often think back to that because I don't know why in that situation I was so sure that I was going to be just fine. But I just think of all the other people that got pulled in and decided to drop.
And if I were a TA using a growth mindset, I might have said, how many hours have you been putting into studying? Are you working with a peer group, or do you need study buddy? How can I help you understand these concepts? So I would have had a whole different conversation, right? If I'd come from a growth mindset. Does that make sense? Yeah. We could role play that, and
we can. That would be therapy.
Yeah. Well, but good for you. But
well, I was going to add to that too, because one of the pieces of research that also support Carol Dweck and the work that she's doing has to do with how different people perceive themselves in terms of being able to be successful or not to be successful. And Susan actually fought a typical stereotype, or maybe several stereotypes that she may have to deal with, about what it means to be successful, either being a woman or being Latina or whatever it happens to be. There are certain expectations people have. There is research that shows that women, for whatever reason, will often feel like they are not successful in a course unless they get a B+ B, not D, B plus or better. Whereas men, for whatever reason, if they get a C minus, it's pretty darn good. And so there's actually a gender difference in terms of how people often perceive their success in either a class or in a program that can have huge ramifications for considering who's going to end up graduating from a particular field or a particular major. So one of the things that I had the chance to do recently was to give a presentation to the STEM X women on campus, which it's a support group basically, although it's more of a community. It's a community of women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It's both our College of Natural Sciences and Math as well as engineering. And the whole purpose was to talk about how can we understand what the challenges are that we might be facing as women in the sciences and engineering and so forth. And then what can we do with that? If we know that we might have these self-perceptions and really they're, you know what? If you get a C in a class and it's a darn difficult course, that could be extremely successful and you might not feel that way about yourself. So having those understandings could make a big difference in terms of whether or not someone transfers out of a major or continues to persist and continues to have that effort and to try. Perception's big.
So I can see where the community you're mentioning, I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
I learn something new every day
There you go.
here at Cal State Long Beach. Would help just on the dimension of I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who feels that way. That there's probably certainly other women and probably some men, but who get discouraged when you're not just about perfect like that. Yeah, I often think that perfection is the barrier to progress. You know, but if we do that to ourselves, so that's important for a professor to know.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And important for us to explicitly encourage and not discourage someone who's facing an initial surprise because maybe you didn't know it was going to be mostly essay and you prepared for multiple choice, or maybe you didn't know the questions were going to be asked in a certain way. And it doesn't even have to do necessarily with knowledge of content, but more of how you are explaining your ideas. There are a lot of differences that could be occurring.
So that's a nice addition to the Dweck research, really nuancing it. So you have any reactions to the research body? Or anything. You can say whatever you want, Kelly.
I was going to comment on what you guys are talking about, that specifically talking about gender equity, you know, or but there's so many things. Our students come with so many stories, and so if we are practicing this across our class and across our the semester, who knows who we're going to affect in a positive way, because we don't know how one individual student is going to react. We can't just say, okay, I'm going to do this for the women in my class or for this particular subset. If we do it for everybody, then we may be affecting everyone.
Everybody.
You know, we have that opportunity because everybody comes with their own background, like you were saying earlier. So
I want to explore that a little bit more, but it reminds me of research I saw many years ago when gifted and talented programs were first put, you know, and they were the big thing, and everybody wanted their kid to be in the gifted and talented program. And I read research about the techniques being used in some of these programs that seemed to me every kid would benefit by experiencing these techniques, not just the gifted and talented. And in fact, I think there were some negative effects of some gifted and talented programs where students in fact felt, I should never be bored, I should never, you know, this should always be very stimulating, rather than realizing some self-responsibility over, well, I could go read another book myself, or I could, you know, dig a little deeper. But so I think that notion of, you know, how different students react to different classroom environments is really important. And so we've talked a little bit about gender, and you've really made it a bigger pool, because we do have students from everywhere, 100 countries, 48 states, and I forget, 75 counties. I just made that last number up. I forget how many counties in California there are. But I've read a bit about maybe systematically how some groups, especially from lower income or first generation to be university students, may struggle with a sense of belonging. In other words, do they really belong here at this university that had 103,000 applications? You know, maybe it was a mistake I got here. Is that just out there in the research, or have you run into it in your own work with students?
I'm trying to decide if I want to answer this from students or research end to this. I think that there's been talk about like culturally responsive pedagogy, and in the College of Natural Sciences, that has to be nuanced because organic chemistry is organic chemistry. So it's not so much about the content, but it's about providing space for students to really talk about what do they know and what are they thinking. And that's tricky, because a lot of spaces, in a lot of educational spaces here and before, it wasn't so much what they know that was valued, but what it was the teacher wanted them to say. And those
Sure.
can be two very different things.
Of course.
Do you want me to tell you what I'm thinking, or do you want me to repeat what I heard you say?
That kind of regurgitation of, I heard you say that in your lecture, so I know you'll like it. Yeah.
Yes. In younger age kids, they'll yell words at you and wait to see what one makes you excited. Actually, they do that at the university too. So I think part of feeling
I'm going to ask for that from now on.
Yes. Part of feeling like you belong is this acknowledgement that your thinking, your way of looking at it, has space to grow from. So going back to sort of the growth mindset, tell me what you're thinking, and I will help you deepen it. My explanation only works for my experiences. You don't have my experiences, so my explanation, although is beautiful, I want you to have your own beautiful explanation. So I think that's part of it, is really making kids realize that, first of all, we selected them on purpose, right? I was that kid that thought I've always been that person that's trying to figure out who's going to figure out I'm not supposed to be in the room. And really then when because it's not enough. I love our signs around campus that say, you belong here, like we chose. I love those signs, but they only work if what happens in the courses, in the lecture halls, in the classrooms reinforces that. And that means we have to really acknowledge what kids are thinking and use it instead of just asking them to repeat what beautiful things we've already said.
So I think you've kind of exploded one pushback against growth mindset in this notion that I have heard from people. I teach organic chemistry. How can I change that for? But you're saying there's space around that content in interaction with students among themselves. You can provide that structure for them to talk about that. Yeah, great. Other thoughts about?
Well, and letting students know, I mean, this is something that I do at the start of every semester. Hey, you've made it here. Way to go. You know, you are now at this senior level or freshman, wherever it is, it doesn't matter. You belong here. And you have shown that you could be in this class, and therefore, we know you can succeed, but it's not going to be without effort. And really driving that point home. And then you can get in and you can keep your content rigorous. And like you said, I think that is a pushback that I hear. Growth mindset's about giving, those gold stars, and it's about praising everybody for just effort, and sometimes effort's not enough, and so why should I give A's for everybody for just trying? And that's where I really disagree, and I think that that's sort of interpreting what growth mindset is in a way that's not very useful.
Or accurate.
Right. And so instead, you can keep your content and your rigor still there, but you can provide that space that really motivates students to want to reach that bar. I think that's the difference, is getting them to want to do it.
What you described as you belong here reminded me of the research you quoted earlier, Lisa, about we know that this is going to be a great year for you.
Right.
This is, you're the bloomers. You're about to flower into something wonderful. Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about so much of this is it's really challenging our ideas of nature versus nurture. I think so often we as a society have had certain ideas of what we think people are. And all of this is helping us rethink that, and we need to challenge ourselves to think differently, that you may not just be born to be a math person or a reader versus a mather, or whatever you want to call it.
However we could say
whatever
that,
you want to say.
Yeah.
But truly, we can grow, and that's sometimes a novel idea for many of us to really think that way.
Well, I don't know if this ever really happened. It never happened to me, but I remember hearing that some professors, in greeting a class of new engineers, would say, "Look to your right, look to your left. Only one of you will be here out of the three of you." And I often think of that when I'm reflecting on this research or reading other research about how many students did we just absolutely discourage,
And I think one of the things we've done here, I can't speak for every course, but we really are looking at completion rates. So, I'm old enough that when I went to school, we had those weeder classes where the purpose of the course was to separate the strong from the weak in whatever strong and weak is, intelligence, perseverance, just sheer
memorization skills,
ability to work without sleep. But we really are focusing more on completion and increasing completion rates, and I think that's a message that students should hear. That not only do we want you here, we want you to be successful, and really starting to see that low completion rate courses. We're looking at why are they, beyond the instructor, but the course, the structure, the sequence that gets you there. So I think that's an important message.
I think it's a very different one, and Kelly's got great experience in that. I recall you're one of our stars in completely designing a course that had been a barrier for lots of students because lots of different students had to take anatomy, right?
Yeah, so yes, I am a low completion rate professor, or I was.
You were in your past.
In my past. Absolutely, and what we found there was actually we applied some principles from growth mindset, though I don't think I knew that that's what it was at the time, to change that course and how students were learning, and it did actually change. We did see an improvement in not just the D, F, or W to C grades, but all along, pushing everybody up. And one of the things we did there was that we flipped the classroom, or flipped the laboratory. So we created short videos that took part some of the lecture, and then we had activities in their place in that lecture time. And that's the growth mindset thing, allowing students to puzzle through an activity, go through the challenges in class, and actually give them the space to think, and that was key.
Well, that's a great model, and I hope lots of other professors have asked you, how'd you do that? And if they haven't, we'll just try to move them over. Really, it brings me to my next point, and is this something that you think, you're believers, but there's always a danger in being a missionary. I have learned that through bad experiences. Is this something we should be planning to roll out to more professors? And if so, do you have suggestions as professors? You have a lot on your plates, and it's not easy to convince somebody to do something new, but any thoughts about how we might, if you agree that we should be trying to get growth mindset as one of the maybe overriding values or approaches at Cal State Long Beach?
Well, I will start by saying I think the first thing we need to do is really assume positive intent with our faculty. I actually really believe that our faculty are here because they like teaching. We're a research institution, we all do research, but we came here because we wanted to be with the student population that we serve, and teaching component was important to us. And that, I think, is going to be the hook for bringing more people on board. That we need to just convince the faculty who are maybe not quite enthusiastic that this will actually pay off to teaching, to improve their effectiveness, because I think our faculty really do care.
So it'll help them do what they love better.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think part of that, just to build on what you're saying, Susan, has to do with having more knowledge about what growth mindset is, because it isn't only telling our students, you need to try harder, you need to just stick with it and you'll be fine, you know, or you can grow. There's more than just telling them that. There's so much more, like, for us to think about, how are we structuring our classes? How are we allowing a safe space to be there for students to fail and then improve? So there's a lot more to it that we don't know about
it's
necessarily.
It's not just putting it on the student, you're saying,
Right,
it's putting it on
right.
ourselves. So this notion of you're creating the podcast, the other electronic resources, that seems, as you mentioned earlier, that's a great example of, so you may listen to my lecture 3 times. And if you get it, you get it. It doesn't matter that it took 3 times to do it. And I love your opening statement, let's assume the best, because that seems to me to be part of what we're talking about too. Let's assume that people bring skills and that they want it, and then figuring out a way to to offer people something that will help them do what they want to do even better. I tend to think that there's sometimes reluctance among some people because they're afraid to fail. You know, they're in a groove, and they get lots of positive feedback, and they've been told that the fact that a bunch of people fail just proves that they're rigorous, and so it takes personal courage, I think, on the part of the professor as well. Do you have one easy, even though it might be rather superficial, one, like, if a professor was going to try this, what would you give a suggestion about what's one small thing you could do just to see how it felt, if it matched?
Well, one small thing, and this came from our college. Our college actually held put growth mindset in your syllabus workshop earlier this year, and it was great. It was direct, it was to the point, and it didn't say you need to change your whole course. It was get it in your syllabus, change some wording, tell students this class is achievable. Here is, here's a recipe for success. This is how to succeed in this course.
So just a paragraph that gives that message.
That message,
You
and
belong
then putting
here,
it
you can
through.
do it,
You can do it, and that's a start. That's it's like you said, it's a small thing, but that can be that first step. And I think sometimes when you take that first step and you get positive results, you want to do more.
Yeah. Lisa, do you have an idea?
I think also something we talked about earlier is that follow through. So how do I, after I have that in my syllabus, then connect with my students?
So that's something that you have to do.
Absolutely.
Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I know the people who have been listening have learned a lot, as I have too. So thanks for being with us at our show, No Barriers. I'm Jane Close Conoley, joined by 3 of our best professors, our growth mindset professors. Thanks for being with us today.